White Beats.
According to Zulu history, in ancient times, their people inhabited northern Africa. When the rain stopped and the region became Sahara, the Zulu migrated south.
Rock shelter in the Libyan desert, the site of an unprecedented discovery, a tiny mummified child. Until the moment he was unearthed, everyone thought the Egyptians had invented mummification in Africa. But this discovery led Dr. Savino Delernia and his team to develop a new theory which challenges everything we thought we knew about ancient Egypt.
Mummification knowledge wasn't born in Egypt, but in another place, in another culture, in another part of the history of the Africa.
Who were these people? Where did they come from? How did they achieve this incredible high standard of mummification at such an early date?
An unknown people mummifying their dead long before the Egyptians? It was this child who would prove to be the key to unlocking a long-lost African culture. Significance of this discovery.
I think that mummy and the rock shelter really started the archaeological and historical reconstruction of the ancient civilizations here in the Sahara.
We think of Libya's population today as largely Middle Eastern, yet the team still believed that thousands of years ago this area was inhabited by black Africans from the south. But apart from some rock art depicting black hunters, archaeologists had no proof of this. The mummy changed all that.
The significance.
The shape of the boy's skull suggested he was black, and if he was, this could rewrite the history of mummification in Africa. They needed to be sure. After a tortuous 10-day camel journey to the nearest town with their fragile cargo, the team returned to Rome to have the mummy analyzed. Dr. Giorgio Manzi of the University of Rome is the world's foremost expert on human remains in Libya, and his department boasts an impressive collection of Libyan skulls.
The reason why the members of the Italian team in the 50s inferred that the child was a black child, a Negro child, is mainly a consideration of his face, especially the length here of the root of the nose, or also here the moving forward of the mouth.
The mummy's teeth also revealed his age at death.
When the Italian team first examined the Wamuja child, they looked at the teeth and found that it was very young. Especially using X-rays, it was easy to determine the exact age, looking at teeth still in the bone, in the alveolus.
So the team had established that Juan Mahujaj was a black, 2.5-year-old boy. But it was the results of the carbon dating which were so amazing. Juan Mahujaj was 5,600 years old. This made him the oldest black mummy ever found in Africa. But where did he come from? Who had mummified this boy 1,000 years before the Egyptians supposedly invented mummification in Africa?
The significance of the black mummy is very great. We have the first evidence of black people in the area, that it was supposed to be, but we hadn't hard evidence of this.
This was the beginning of an extraordinary quest that would ultimately reveal an unknown African culture.
The idea that Europeans came in through North Africa is very firmly fixed. But Stephen Oppenheimer's evidence does not support this.
Genetic evidence completely does not support it. There's no evidence of the early branches, and in fact only one of the main branches that people the world is found in the European region. Now, of course, that does upset a lot of fixed views about the origins of the Europeans, and forces us to consider the fact that Europeans were part of the same single family that came out of Africa through the southern route.
White beats. White beats.
And there's some other interesting things about DNA too. Other markers, and I have to finish now. Other markers clearly, in terms of lines of descent, tie together not just simply all of humanity. You can forget that there's some other more specific markers that tie people from China all the way to Africa together. And it's like amazing. That's the YAP marker. You know, and there used to be a debate, did the Yap marker arise in Africa, arise in Asia? If you say the Yap marker arose in Asia, then you're saying most of all Africans today came from Asia. Now, I know certain people don't want to hear that, you know, those who are ideologically oriented in particular ways. So no, you know, but the proof, so to speak, is that number one, that wasn't very logical based on the dates of the emergence of the Yap marker, but also within Nigeria today, they found some people who have the Yap marker. Well, that's a long story, but anyway, it sort of submits that Africa is the place of origin for this particular marker. Okay. Here. What's important about this is one thing I want to say, and then I'm going to stop. This is uniparentally inherited. This is a Y chromosome. Passed from father to son to son to son. This particular DNA marker here, PN2, is sort of the background, and that's what this means. It's the background of 73% of all of the peoples in Africa today. 73%. The PN2 is found in West Africa and sub-equatorial Africa. I mean, I'm sorry, the P2 or M2 as it's called. This M35, 215 M35, is what you find in the Horn of Africa up to Egypt and over to Morocco. It corresponds to the 5 and the 11 in the previous slide. This is the father of both groups of Africans. This binds the continent together, okay? So although you have Berbers with blue eyes and blonde hair, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, they share, for the most part, this PN2 ancestry with people in West and tropical Africa. This is the modern population. And they share much less of the M89, which comes off the tree, in another way.
They first went into Egypt, when the Mediterranean people first went into Egypt.
When I talk about 60,000 years ago there being no modern people in Europe, what I'm saying is the best evidence that we have for modern people being anatomically, what we call anatomically modern people in any part of Europe is at the outside 40,000 years, okay? And when you talk about Mediterranean people, we need to talk about that later on because, as I have said and tried to say, Africans don't all look alike. So some of what you're calling Mediterranean people are just some more Africans, okay? Now, you have to get your arms around that. And that's what that last slide was about with the PN2 transition. Because most of the people there who have that PN2 transition, that particular gene, that genealogy, in its derived form is M35. For example, Berbers are M35, M81. Those people don't look like Congolese. But I'm trying to have you understand that they are carrying genealogically, in terms of their male ancestry at least, they're carrying something that ties them to the rest of the continent and does not tie them to Europe, even though physically, externally, you may say, well, gee, they look like Europeans. You understand what I'm saying? So when you ask me, when did X, we don't use those concepts of Mediterranean race, Alpine race, Nordic race, all that, that's from another era. You know, it's descriptive, and in actual fact, you will find, you can find individuals all over the world who might conform to one of those sort of categories. You see, understand, what are you asking me here? Well, you ask me, very specifically, you ask me, when did Mediterranean people get to Egypt? I don't know what you mean by Mediterranean, but let me repeat myself.
Don't look African.
No, well, there's more than one way to be African. There's more than one way to look African. There's more than one way to look Asian. There's more than one way to be Asian. That is what you have to, from my perspective as an evolutionary biologist, that's what you have to get your arms around. The people in southern India are just as Asian as the people in northern China, who are just as Asian as the people from the Eurasian steppes. You know, they don't look alike. And you measure them, they don't look alike. Always been people who were lighter skinned and straighter haired from 60,000 years ago. Always. They're not new. That's my whole point. In fact, I could make the argument that those kinds of characteristics actually originated in Africa. Yeah, that they didn't come from someplace else. Yeah. They're part of modern humanity, or they're part of humanity. And there's no reason to believe that they could not have originated in Africa. Incidentally, skin color can flip back and forth from an evolutionary point of view, we now know, every 15,000 or so years. It's not the sort of thing that, you know, it takes 100,000 years, million years to live in one place. And skin color itself is not always an accurate index, even in current situations like in Brazil and Venezuela. It doesn't necessarily give you a proportionate amount of ancestry. You can have people with very fair skin, but actually have more, quote-unquote, black ancestors than some people who are actually darker. So you have to be very careful about what you think you can quantify from that, again, based on science evidence. Now, the issue of having narrow features, a narrow face, and what have you, we have remains, and normally I would show you this slide, but we're not going to get to that today, of people from Gambel's Cave in East Africa down in Kenya that are probably about 10 to 12,000 years old. If you measure them up and submit them to a forensic type analysis, they'll cluster with Europeans. They're not Europeans. Their limb ratios are as tropical as you can be. They come from right there. That's what you have to get on. No, you don't lose it because you have
for the diversity.
No, you don't lose anything because you have your model-based approach. You have a real history of a species that emerged in Africa. You have some real fossils. You have some real people that you can look at. You have some real DNA evidence that ties together. Frankly, I was quite astounded when I found that when the Y chromosome data got produced, they didn't have that 25 years ago when I first started on this adventure. But I am pleased to say that I wrote, and you can get my master's thesis, I said, there's no theoretical reason why these Berbers from Algeria couldn't share common ancestors in the late Pleistocene. And sure enough, 20 years later, when the DNA came out, because what most people would say is they look at these Berbers, and I have pictures of them, they say, oh, these are descendants of the Vandals, because they look like Europeans. Well, I'm trying to have you understand that God or evolution, whichever one you want to choose to work with, works in mysterious ways. And I'm trying to have you understand that from a scientific point of view, that PN2 marker, that PN2 gene, ties 70% of the continent together. And there's some other things that are basically only restricted to Africa, except for the odd one you find outside, groups A and B. This belong to the E group. We can talk about that later. But no, what you're saying is that if you don't have some hard and fast boundaries, then it's hard for you to work with certain things. And I'm saying that would be like saying that if your son, if you had 6 sons and one of them moved to China and his descendants were only Chinese, and one moved to Greenland and his descendants were only Inuit, and another son moved to, I don't know, the Amazon and his descendants were only, folks from the Amazon, that they wouldn't be your relatives. That would not patently be not true. Genealogically, they would all be connected to you because you're the grandpa. They're still connected. The idea that physical similarity will always track with relationship is what we're trying to get. I'm trying to dispel you of that notion because it's not always true. And so there's sometimes people who may look very similar, or when you measure certain things, they may appear to be similar based on the math, but in actual fact, using other measures and other kinds of information, you know that that can't possibly be true.